And welcome to another edition of Stepping Stones live on Facebook. Tonight we have Mark Ceylon, and he's going to be discussing the good, the bad, and the ugly money, part one, with Caroline Stevens. Stand by. You're on air.
Welcome to a Stepping Stones to Awareness show. I'm Caroline Stevens, and today I've got Mark Ceylon live via Skype from Nottingham. Now, Mark and I met each other at the beginning of last month. We went to a constitutional event in New York, and we both had a shared interest of supporting people not getting into debt. So, Mark, welcome to Wiltshire. And it's good to see you again.
Yeah, good to see you too again.
So, Mark, you and I both had a shared passion of finance.
Yes.
The good, the bad and the ugly. The banks are the ugly part, I guess. And so can you give everybody a little bit of a background information as to how you got into your debt-free website?
Well, I was running my own company. It was a transport company. And then in 2006, the government changed the legislation, or rules as I like to call them, because they're not laws. But it meant that the company had to do certain things which would end up costing thousands of pounds. And it just made the company no point running it because it wasn't going to make any profit. So by 2008, the company had gone by February. We managed to sell a house in the summer, otherwise that would have gone. And previous to that, I'd been exposing what's been going off in the rest of the planet. And it was only from 2008 onwards I really dug deep into the financial system. And the more I dug, the more I couldn't believe was going on, because the whole game is a scam.
So you're talking about bank lending, for example?
Yes.
So so did you actually physically go into debt with the company?
Yeah. As the business was failing, we took loans out to try and keep it going, and of course it just didn't work. It was never going to work. But at the time, you do anything you can to try and keep afloat. And once it was gone, we got rid of the house. That was literally, we'd been for repossession. And normally they give you 4 weeks. Well, they actually gave us 8 weeks because we told them we was in the middle of selling it, which was sort of, at the time I thought was quite good. But when you realise the bigger picture, I was just a compliant slave at the time.
So did you happen to see a show I did a few weeks ago about shadow banking?
No, I missed that one.
Right. Have you come across shadow banking at all in your?
I would suspect so.
Yeah.
I would probably call it something different.
Okay, so after you sold your house, what did you uncover? Were you dealing with the banks, the building societies, the government?
All of them. But I realised by that point that because I'd taken all these loans out just to try and keep a business that was going to fail because of the government, after we got rid of the house and we had a few quid left, I decided we'd actually enjoy that and wouldn't be paying any of the debts. Not because I didn't want to, simply because I felt I was owed something back for being lied to. As I delved deeper into the financial side of things, it became blatantly obvious that there is only one single form of wealth, and that is us, the people. We are the only form of wealth on the planet. If we all stop doing everything today for a month, nothing would happen. Absolutely nothing. We wouldn't have TV, we wouldn't have electric, we wouldn't have gas, we probably wouldn't have war. Everything would stop if we stopped. So we're not just the only commodity. We should actually be the controllers of said commodity, because it's us.
Sounds like a legal fiction situation. So where would you like us to go on this? Would you like us to go into the legal fiction side, or would you like us to go into all these organisations trying to help people get out of debt free?
Well, there comes the first problem with the financial side of things. They claim that they're going to help you get out of debt, but they never do. what they'll do, they'll get you to fill out an agreement to say that you can only pay £1 a month or whatever. But what that is it's a snidey way of actually tying you deeper into debt, because by going into one of these type of agreements, you're actually acknowledging that you owe something. And the way I'll explain this to you is for a mortgage, for instance, and that will actually lead to something else as well.
Okay.
But it also deals with if you take a loan from a bank. So you go to a bank and you say, I want to buy this house, £100,000. And whoever's dealing with you goes, yeah, no problem, just fill out this agreement. And this agreement is going to be how you access the money that's going to buy your property. So you fill out this agreement. Now, notice there straight away, it's an agreement. Right, and it's agreement because if it was contract, there would be different rules and they'd have to tell you certain things that they will never, ever want to tell you. So you fill out this agreement and it's got your name on it. It's also got the amount that you're going to borrow, £100,000, in words and in numbers.
Yeah.
And then, and I'm just doing this really quickly because I'm aware of the short time we've got here, then you sign that agreement. Now, there's another document that has all them points on them. Do you know what that is?
The conditions.
Nope. If you look at a bank note, a £10, a £20, a £5, a £50, if you've got one, underneath the Bank of England, it says, I promise to pay the bearer on demand the sum of. And as I said, it's got all those details that the agreement has on it, right down to the point when you put your signature on it. And I sussed out that what we're actually doing when we go for a loan or for a mortgage, we're actually creating a promissory note, like the £10, £20. They are actually promissory notes because they're promising to pay, but we accept it as payment. We actually live off promissory.
Yep.
I promise to pay the pub for the beer I drink. They promise to pay the brewery with the same promissory notes. The brewery then promise to pay their supplies with a promise. And it's just a perpetual motion of promissory notes. So nothing ever actually gets paid. But here's where it comes interesting if you are going for a mortgage. So we'll take it that I've created a promissory note for £100,000. Well, that's my money because I've created it, or it should be. But what the bank then does, they get you to, strangely enough, they get you to fill out a contract. Well, why didn't we use a contract for the money I'm supposed to have lent? Because they would have had to have told you that when you create that amount, you are creating the money that we're going to pretend to lend you. So they use a contract, and what they do with the contract is they say that I want you to sign this to say that you will pay us back the £100,000 you've borrowed plus interest, and if you can't manage it, we will repossess your house. And do you understand that? And you go, yeah, okay, I get that sort of thing. But what they don't tell you there in that part, even because it's still a scam, is they don't tell you that when you sign that contract, you are signing over your property, which is free of all encumbrances, which means it's got no debt on it. And it hasn't got any debt. Do you know why?
Why?
Because you created the promissory note that the bank then fraudulently pretends to lend you back the money that you created. Then they want you to pay it back plus interest when you created it in the first place. But what happens then is when you can't pay or you don't pay, they come round and they call it repossessing your home, except they never possessed it in the first place. They scammed you into believing that you were actually buying a property, and at the end of 24 years, 25 years, whatever term you take out, you're going to own that property. The only problem is you don't. You can't own property.
You can't own property. So what about the land registry?
Right. So, do you own a car?
Yep. Oh, yes.
Have you registered it?
Yes.
So how can the council come along and take your car if it's parked somewhere they say they don't like it being parked, take it away and crush it or ransom it back to you if you owned it? Because if you owned it, that would be theft. But because you've registered it with the DVLA, you only hold the title the DVLA own the ownership of the actual car. That's
Right.
why this can happen.
Okay. But
Now-
so, Mark, have you got your car registered with the DVLA? No.
Not as such.
Oh, that's not a very straight answer.
Well, you see, there are ways you can deal with this subject. And one of the ways is to put your property into a trust. Now, if your car is in a trust at a separate address to your home,
Yeah.
a trust address, your car is registered with the DVLA at some other address. So, this serviced offices where you can use. So there's someone there all the time that will take your mail, and they'll send you an email saying, "Oh, you've got this mail from such and such," and you'll say, "Oh, bin it or send it on to me." Now, if you go through that process and you get a parking ticket or other things, but I'm not going to mention the other things because I don't want to give anyone ideas. But say you get a parking ticket and you don't pay it, and the council, with parking tickets, by the way, I did this on Edge Media about 5 or 6 years ago, where I exposed parking tickets, because a parking ticket, well, do you know what a parking ticket is?
Is that a promise to pay? Promissory note?
No, it's an offer of a contract. You're going to stay here. Well, we're offering you this contract that says you can only stay here for X amount of hours.
Yeah.
And by staying here, you agree to that contract. However, under contract law, that's not a fair contract.
Have I not to sign that contract?
Well, that's one of the things. It needs to be signed by two parties, you and the council. Of
Yeah.
course, never sign it. Under contract law, you have 72 hours, 3 days to reject any contract. So what I did, and if you ever find the episode of Edge Media, if it's still floating about on YouTube or whatever, you'll see where I get this big stack of parking tickets out, wafting them up and down. Because what I realised was, if they're offering me a contract, and under contract law I can refuse that contract, I'll just send it back in the post to them with refused for cause, which means I don't want the offer of your contract. And I posted it back to them.
But
And
you still park there. You still park there, and
yeah, every ticket I got, I did exactly the same thing with. Unfortunately, because it then went out on Sky and the other channels that were showing it, almost everyone in the country that saw it thought, "Wow, I'll do that." So they went and got, like I did when I first realised what was going on. I deliberately went out to get a parking ticket to see if it worked, and it did. So what the councils did, and this is where it gets into the corruption, a little bit of the ugly, even though it's a bit early for the ugly. What the councils did, they all got together because they realised what I was saying was absolutely 100% correct. They are offering you a contract. So therefore, you have every right to ignore that contract or reject that contract, should I say. And they talked and they realised that, well, under contract law, he's bang on. If they refuse that offer of a contract, there's nothing we can do about it. So what are we going to do? And they all got together and they says, I know what we'll do. We'll commit a criminal act. We will just ignore contract law totally. And that's what they do nowadays. They just totally ignore contract law.
oh wow, right,
So
okay.
all councils that issue tickets are now breaking the law because they're refusing, even though they know they are offering you a contract, they're refusing to back up the fact that it is a contract and you've got every right to reject it.
So we've got corruption on a wide scale now.
Absolutely across the board.
So that's what
Well-
these shows are doing. What we're trying to do is we're trying to educate the public into knowing how corruption is so widespread.
Well, I'll tell you how, because that did get me into some rather hot water and arrested, and a Crown Court case with 6 other defendants looking at, well, I don't know what I was looking at, but time, because what they'd done,
Is that a criminal act?
according to them it was, according to them, but they made it a criminal. What happened, as I explained, because they scam you with the house mortgage problem. Now, there was a bloke called Tom Crawford who was a member of Good F, and he put a posting out with a video saying he'd paid his mortgage for 25 years, which he's got proof of. The bank lost his endowment policy. His original mortgage was 40,000 or thereabouts, 40 something thousand. He paid over £120,000 back, and the bank said, well, we don't remember losing the endowment policy, so you still owe us £40,000. And they decided they were going to evict him. And this is where we really started digging into things. And Tom in particular realised, with help from many of our friends, one being, of course, the late Guy Taylor, we realised that we put a request in to see the forms that they had to fill out to go for a warrant, a warrant of entry to evict you, a warrant to evict you, basically. And it turned out that every eviction that we've ever put a request into about, the bank has never paid the fee to initiate the eviction process in the first place, which means that the whole eviction is null and void. Now, the first time Tom put that out, I think it was about July of 20. Now, I might be a year long out here. So I think it was 2014 or 15. And on that day, because it went all over the internet and I publicised it everywhere, there are varies and nobody was actually counting, but there was between 200 and 400 men, women and children turned up at Tom's address on the day of the eviction, and that the eviction never happened. The bailiffs never even turned up. And this shows you people power, because this scared the crap out of them. I can guarantee that. So what happened there? They left it for 6 months until January the following year, the 23rd again, strangely enough. And they notified him again, because if you're going to be evicted, you have to be notified that bailiffs are coming to evict you. Because
how much notice do they have to give you?
They have to give you notice that they're going to be coming on this day at this time. And the thing is, bailiffs are only coming for vacant possession under their own rules and regulations, and some even like to call them laws, but I don't. It states that if there's someone in a property that is against being evicted, you cannot, under their own rules, force entry, and yet they do. Now, on the January that came along, again, Tom put a video out and I publicised it everywhere, what was going off again.
Yeah.
And this time, again, the estimates have varied, but somewhere between 600 and 800 people turned up. It was like, and this was in January when it was actually very cold, whereas the other one had been in the summer where it had been very hot. So we had no idea how many was going to turn up. But he lives and the whole close was rammed. You could not move with the amount of people, and out onto the main roads as well. And what happened there was a group of about 6 to 8 thugs from North Wales that didn't know what was going on, but they were supposedly bailiffs, came down to try and forcibly evict him. Only, of course, they met 800 or so men, women and children that weren't going to let that happen. So when they were confronted about it, they claimed to be shoe salesmen.
Shoe salesmen?
These big, massive, burly bailiffs chickened out and pretended to be shoe salesmen. They were that terrified. So what happened then? Over the next few months, the courts, the police, the council and the banks all colluded together to sort it out. And what they decided was they will, literally a year to the date almost of the first non-eviction, they drafted in over 200 police from all the local police authorities, from Derby, Leicester, Grantham, all over, Nottingham, all over. They drafted in 200 police. There was around 12 Black Mariahs. There was 2 helicopters. There was 1 fire engine. There was ambulance. There were 50, again, bussed in from Birmingham, alleged bailiffs. They were just security staff that were bussed in and said, "We'll just say that you're bailiffs," even though they weren't. And they forcibly took back the property, or stole the property, should we say. Now, about 20 or so days thereabouts later, me and 5 other of, well, actually, I didn't hardly know any of them then. In fact, some of them I didn't know. But we actually got back onto the roof of Tom's bungalow, Tom and Sue's bungalow. And we were up in the bungalow, in the loft. And the security with guard dogs and that, we'd made them look like silly, really silly, because of what how it had worked, which I don't want to go into because I don't want to give too much away what happened there. But then
how did you get back in then?
We climbed on the roof, and it was interesting. But we climb up a fence, jump onto the garage, which got us onto the roof.
Right.
Now, while we're there, people turn up to, go on, give Tommy's house back up. Or in fact, when we got there and the police finally turned up, they said, "What can we do to get you to come down?" And we said, "Show us the warrant." To which one cop laughed and says, "Okay, I'll get it." Went on the phone to the court, says, "Yeah, can you get the warrant down?" And they told him, "Yeah, it'll be down in no time." Anyway, as the day passes, as 1 hour turns to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5, our supporters are turning up all the time. So we're starting to get a mass of men, women, and children. They're there supporting us and that. And the cop, you finally see him realise that there's no warrant ever going to be shown. Anyway, it gets to around about 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, somewhere in that time, when the police have now gathered enough force so they can push all the protesters back down the close to keep them away, because they didn't want them to see what they were about to do. What they then did, once they'd got them up the hill and out the way so you couldn't see what was going on at the house, then TSG van turned up with cops in armoured gear and big spikes and, all coming in with bags and bags of tools. Now, we're in the loft. It's a bungalow. We're in the loft. And what they do is they're talking to try and get us to come down. We said all along, "Show us the warrant that you've used to evict Tom, Sue and his daughter from this house and we will come down." Of course, they couldn't show it. Anyway, around about 8 o'clock, they're distracted us by chatting while the TSG are underneath the floor that some of us are stood on, some of us are laying on, and with big steel spikes, they're ramming them through the floor that we're stood on in an attempt, I'm convinced, an attempt to murder us.
But they're destroying the property at the same time. I mean...
they don't give it... They've had orders. They can do anything they want to get us off that roof.
Right.
And that literally does mean kill us if necessary. But they didn't, because what happened when they were smashing the through, we were all... Let's say, if we'd have had a toilet, we'd have probably been going to it at that point. But we didn't. So they continue that. And then 3 of the guys that were there, because there was 5 guys, including me, and 1 woman. 3 of the guys said, we'll come down, because they were in fear. And one of them had actually been hit on the ankle by this steel spike coming through the floor. So as these 3 guys are going down, we're going out the window, up onto the roof, up to the front of the house on the ridge tiles, right at the front of the house on the ridge tile. When the third guy comes down, the cops then start coming into where we'd been. And the cop who'd been, well, I just suspect it was him with the spike, says, "You can come down now. There's nothing to worry about." It says, no, it's okay. We're going to stay here. Whether it was him or one of the others, I don't know. But they went, because this is in the under roof of the house. They went to where we were sat right at the front with a 40-foot drop with the spike smashing the roof tiles that we're sat on.
Wow. Have you got a head for heights as well, Mark?
Well, not if I'd have gone off the edge, no. But I'm okay at certain heights. At that point, if any one of us had gone off the front, because we were right at the front of the house on the very last ridge tile, if any one of us had gone, I suspect we would have been killed.
Yeah.
This is how serious these cops were. Well, they weren't cops. They were just thugs in uniform. So there's 3 of us now on the roof. We spend a very, very cold night. Even though it was July, it was freezing. Me, Henry and Betty. We spend a freezing night on the roof. None of us were prepared for this. I mean, I had a coat on at least. Henry just had a jumper, and I think Betty had a jacket. So we were sort of huddled together to keep ourselves warm throughout the night. And I think we eventually sort of stopped listening to because they sent a negotiator up to talk, and he was trying to talk us down. And we stopped listening to him about 2 o'clock in the morning, where we just huddled each other and just sat there. And that was a long night, that was. The next day comes, and he's, about 9 o'clock, he pops back up again, trying to talk to us, get us to come down. What do we want? Again, we said, we want to see the warrant. Of course, this was a Saturday now, I think, or a Sunday. And so Saturday, it was a Saturday. And they said, "Oh, well, the courts are shut." But I know for a fact you can go to a court and you can force them to open up, and you can force them to give you the document that you will request on any day of the week. anyway, it carried on till about 4 o'clock that afternoon, when we've eventually decided we were going to come down. We'd proved our point. The TV crews had been out and filmed us and all that sort of thing. So we came down, and we were treated very nicely. I will admit, by the cops that were there. We were even handcuffed front like that, stacked, as opposed to around the back. And we were taken to the police station. We spent the weekend in the cells, all 7 of us, because at one point, Craig Crawford, Tom's son, and Ginger had come along in about 6 o'clock in the morning, snuck through and chucked us some food and water up, because all the stuff we had was in the inside the house. So we had some food and water to keep us going. Of course, the only problem is you're eventually going to need to go to the toilet. And that was the main reason we came down in the end. Then on the Monday, we're in court. Now, the judge...
What type of court was that?
It was the Mags court, but it was with a judge. So you figure out what type of court it was, because here's something that's interesting. He sent one of the crowd down straight away for 2 months.
Really?
The rest, yes. The rest, he bailed. It then got to me, and I basically, he wanted my name, and obviously he wants my slave name so that he can administer my trust. And he wants my date of birth, and I've said allegedly my date of birth is, and of course he gets a bit irate at this, because he knows that I know what the game is by giving my date of birth. Or it's not my date of birth; it's the date of the incorporation of the straw man, or whatever you want to call them. It gives them joinder. Now, but that goes on for about 10 minutes, where he says, well, you can go back down if you want. So I get up to walk back down to the cells. I don't care. I'll go back down the cells. And they go, no, come back. He calls me back again. He said, that's when he says, I've already sent one of your lot down. If you don't start doing as you're told, then you'll be going to prison as well. So I gave him the name, although I did say allegedly again with the birth, because I can't say that date on that birth certificate is the date I was born, because I was told that by my parents. So therefore it's hearsay, and hearsay is inadmissible in a court of law. So I quite rightly always say allegedly that's my date of birth. Now, at one point, the judge, this is while I was the last one up. I think they sort of marked me as the ringleader or something like that, even though none of us were actually involved in any of it.
They probably thought you were Robin Hood.
Well, that is my avatar on some of my YouTube channels and things like that. And here's something where the judge actually broke the law himself. Because, you're not allowed to practice law from the bench.
Nope.
Well, if you're a judge, you're there to judge only. You are not allowed to practice law from that position.
Right.
He ordered the CPS to ramp up the charges. And so eventually we were charged with something along the lines of conspiracy to commit violent disorder and conspiracy to commit criminal damage. And of course, when they had that conspiracy part on, it ranks it up. That means we're going to Crown Court now. Anyway, it was 6 months before we actually get to Crown Court. And they moved it from Nottingham to Leicester because they didn't want loads of followers turning up and supporting us. However, loads did turn up at Leicester anyway. It was set for a 3-week court case.
3 weeks? That must have been costly.
It only lasted 8 days, though. The first day was all the other 5 had all pleaded not guilty. Me and Craig Crawford had pleaded no case to answer. And that's because we knew we hadn't done anything wrong. We checked on the land registry the morning before I went up, and it still said on the land registry, owner of the property, Tom and Sue Crawford. So therefore, we can't be doing anything wrong if we're going onto the owner's property with the owner's consent. And so we said no case to answer. The judge listened to that for the first day, and then he said, well, actually, I think you have got a case to answer, so the trial will start tomorrow. So the trial starts on as it was then, Tuesday. And we had questioned all the security staff. There's about 6 or 7 of them in total. We'd questioned them all, and apart from the girl who didn't say anything negative about us, she just said what had gone off, all the others, we'd proven that they'd lied in their statements. They committed perjury. And the one that hadn't committed perjury actually changed his mind from his statement to what the rest had said to commit perjury on the day. So we'd caught them all out lying. All that was left for the prosecution was the police evidence gatherers, which is basically video footage, which we'd already seen plenty of anyway. And it was a shambles, to be honest with you. So the third day into the official trial, because we were still asking to see the warrant. We'd been given a copy in our bundles of a warrant from 2012. Well, a warrant from 2012 isn't valid in 2015.
No.
And so we kept saying, we'd like to see the original warrant. So after 3 days, the judge finally getting a little bit pissed off with us, keep asking about the warrant. So in front of the jury, he orders the CPS to contact Nottingham Court and get a certified copy of the warrant sent over. And then we broke for lunch. And we come back after lunch, just grab a drink of water.
It's amazing the CPS took the judge seriously. The CPS seem to be a law unto themselves, don't they?
Well, they are, but when a Crown Court judge orders you to do something, he's the boss of you, because you're in the same gang, but he's above you. Yeah. So he then, after lunch, he had to stand up in front of the jury and say he tried, but there was not a judge in Nottingham that would sign to say there's a certified copy of a warrant, the same warrant that was used to evict Tom, Sue and his daughter from their property. This is a Crown Court judge cannot get to see an alleged warrant that's been used to evict people. So, either way, we continue on for another 3 or 4 days. And then after another 3 or 4 days of us still continually saying, we'd like to see the warrant. That's the evidence. That proves, just show us that. That proves what you're saying is correct. And we're wrong. We'll put our hands up and say we're wrong. We'll plead guilty. So the judge, on the 7th day, orders the CPS to get a copy of the original warrant from Nottingham, and the CPS was actually based in Nottingham, so we had to go back there every night anyway, and bring it to court to the next day. Well, we're like, woohoo, without making them noises or doing them things until after we got out of court. So we adjourn for the day. We still don't sit on our laurels. We go back and we're starting digging into stuff that we know, other stuff we can use if it does continue. We come back at court the next day, and in front of the jury again, the CPS, bearing in mind they only had one other witness, that was a cop, the CPS stand up and say, we offer no evidence.
Oh, really?
So even before a Crown Court judge, there has never been a legitimate warrant shown to any member of the public or even a Crown Court judge. That warrant was legitimate. Therefore, I'm fairly sure, and I always have been, that there was no warrant ever existed in the first place. And if it did, it was a fraudulent warrant that just used to, oh, look, here's a copper, or green, the gold commander. Here, look, there's a warrant. See, look there, just to fake it, because he'll go, yeah, I've seen a warrant.
But they've got to be signed, haven't they? And who signs a warrant?
It has to be signed. It has to be a justice of the peace, a magistrate, a judge, with their name printed where the signature is. Because I could go and sign a document for the repossession of your house and just put a squiggle there. Well, who's liable then? Mr. Squiggle? There's no liability, and that's why they don't sign them, because they know they're committing criminal act by doing what they're doing anyway. And if they sign it and put their name to it, they are then putting their own personal liability on that document. That's why you will never get one signed properly. And it should have a raised seal on it as well, and not a stamp, although they do tend to say that's the seal. It's not. A raised seal is where you emboss it onto the paper and it raises it, so it's a proper. And if you look into any older court orders, you'll find them all with raised seals and proper
embossing, isn't it?
Wax seals and yeah. But because they've been committing more and more criminal acts as every day passes, they know they've got to cover themselves, and the only way to cover themselves is to make sure they're not liable for it. And how do you get them away from being liable? You just scribble anything you like. Who are you going to prove signed that?
So what happened to the case?
It's still ongoing, still being fought 3 years later.
So does Tom still own the house according to the land registry?
It's been sold on about 3 or 4 times. But what Tom did, because obviously he's fighting this with tooth and nail as well, he sent a document. I'm not sure if it was a SAR or a freedom of, I think it was probably a SAR, to the land registry. He'd managed to get hold of a list of documents. It's about 8 or 9 documents that are needed to support any warrant. And he listed them, these 8 or 9 separate things, and sent it off to the CPS saying, with the warrant that was used against me, I'd like to know how many of these you've actually got. And the CPS wrote back and says, we've never seen and have no way of ever getting hold of any of them documents.
But yet he doesn't live in his own house anymore.
No.
So this is an example of how it's a conspiracy between the banks, the judiciary,
Yep.
CPS.
Yep. The councils.
Yeah.
And the courts.
And we're just cannon fodder.
Well, Tom actually took some evidence. This was proper hardcore evidence, not hearsay or anything like that, down to the royal courts. And he went before as far as I'm concerned, a gatekeeping, corrupt judge, Judge Phillips from the Royal Courts of Justice, who said, "I see that this is just hearsay. This, even though it was proper, full-on evidence, he's just a criminal, corrupt judge. Judge Phillips is his name from the Royal Courts. He's as bent as a 9-bob note."
Right. On that note, then, so what do you see the future for the court system? I mean, because it's all privatised now, isn't it?
It's going to collapse. It's got to collapse. It's falling to bits. How it's managing to stay going. The solicitors know it's going. They can see the collapse coming. And it's blatantly obvious to anyone in this particular area. They can see what's going. And the thing is, it's by design. They've deliberately cut all where you could get your solicitor's fees paid for by the government. They deliberately cut all that, unless you're somehow fit into their little box that you've got to fit into, which means, yeah, you can still get it. So
it's very tight criteria, and it depends on the type of act,
yes,
doesn't it, that's been committed. Yeah.
The solicitors have seen their incomes drop dramatically. A lot are leaving because of that. And maybe not just because that, maybe because they can also see what's coming down the tracks towards them. And I honestly believe that it will get to the point where the public will be so pissed off with how they've been lied to and deceived by the governments, the courts, the councils, the police, that they probably will go out and have lynch mobs for MPs and lawyers. In fact, it's interesting that most revolutions, though I don't want a revolution because I don't want to go round again, most revolutions start with the execution of lawyers and judges, because they're the ones that's brought us to this point by signing these particular rules into, well, they call it law, but I just call it acts and statutes.
Right then, so on that sobering note, Mark, have you got a message for the viewers at home tonight?
I say it all the time, but you've got to do your research. Yes, I can show you how to do these things, but if you don't understand what you're doing, they're going to ask you a question that you're going to panic. And yes, I'll tell you the answer, but that's not the point. You shouldn't have to come back to me. You should do your own research so you understand fully what is going on and what you're saying when you're asking questions. So when they do come back with a question, you can answer it there and then, and that'll knock them to 6. They don't know how to deal with that type of thing. So do your own research. Educate yourself, because one thing's for sure, what you get in schools and colleges is not an education, it's an indoctrination into the corrupt system.
Well, Mark, thanks for speaking to us. You're obviously the good, the bad and the ugly. Well, they can fight it out amongst themselves between the judges and possibly the MPs, because they're ultimately responsible for what happens in this country. Or is it the EU? Anyway, thank you, Mark, and I look forward to interviewing you on part 2, where we're going to talk about Brexit or non-Brexit. See you again soon. Thanks, Mark.
Caroline.
Bye.